Hi, I'm Chris C., the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Welcome to the first of a series of Fireside chat where we invite industry professionals both in Web3 and Web2 and other industry adjacent to our amazing space in blockchain and crypto to talk about what we believe the mainstream adoption will look like. And today I am so glad to be joined by Kipp Bodnar, who is in his professional life a marketer, but in his role as CMO of HubSpot, really understand how to bring community into this energy of being able to learn and grow together. Something I think is very relevant to our discussion on Web3. So welcome, Kipp.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Chris. This is awesome. Great to be here.
Yes. So Kipp and I have been having a back and forth conversation in the last few months. And, I think just in full disclosure, Kipp has joined us as a board advisor for the Cardstack Foundation to help us understand how to engage that kind of adoption angle, the marketing angle, not just in terms of buying ads or doing influencer stuff, but really organic building, learning community that comes together. And the approach that he has taken in his professional credit to grow community within the Web2 space, I think is super relevant to it. And also his interest and his angel investment and participation in Web3 project was just super valuable to us so we know what's going on. But I don't want to steal his thunder. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and like what brought you to Web3?
Yeah. So thanks for having me, everyone. My background is in Web2, SaaS specifically. So I started at HubSpot when we were about a $10 million run rate business. We're now well over $1 billion revenue business. Got there over the last 12 years. Been an amazing journey. And I would say over the last 3 to 4 years, I've really started being interested in more decentralized technologies and getting into Web3, whether it be through initial crypto tokens, whether it be through the really cool NFT projects and everything that I'm a part of. And then got really passionate about DAOs, DAO tooling, and a whole host of things in the Web3 space. But for me, I saw it as the natural evolution of the web and our ability to change how we build community, incentivize community members. And the difference for me is Web3 isn't different than Web2. It is we're taking all the things we learned in Web2 and we're adding a new playbook on top of those. It doesn't mean that we're leaving them behind. A lot of those things are going to work, but we are going to start doing some things very differently over the next 1 to 5 years. It's going to transform how businesses can grow.
Yeah, I think this idea of Web2 is like Web2 plus Web1 or Web2 plus 1 is really super exciting. So what do you think is the ingredient, the key addition that Web3 brings to the stack of the web?
A couple things. I'm going to answer the question first through a marketing lens, okay? Mm-hmm. And through the marketing lens, like if you look at what's happening in marketing right now, you know what a lot of people are doing? They are really going hard and heavy, really aggressively into email. Why are they going really aggressively at email? Well, because it's actually one of the few decentralized marketing channels that exist. It's built on SMTP, open protocol. You don't have a gatekeeper like Google, Facebook, anybody ahead of that. And that's what's happening, is that Web3 is going to introduce a new set of open protocols and the ability to incentivize people without intermediaries. The problem when you have an aggregator and intermediary, they're amazing, but as the full market moves there, the competition and the expense just gets so high that growth can only be like very thin margin and to be predictable. And Web3 is going to open up a whole new set of marketing and business opportunities because we're able to go and incentivize our community directly versus paying some intermediary to get access to them.
Yeah, I think this whole idea that most marketing spend end up being in Google's pocket and Facebook pocket, and the more powerful those channels, the greater their take. The exact percentage can be debated until the cows come home in marketing conferences, but it's a lot more than email, which is pretty close to zero.
Yeah. Look, for email, you're just paying for your email service provider for your cost to send email, and yet there are hard costs to send email through SMTP, right? But It's less of you're not going through some bid system with all your competitors to email somebody, right? And I think what we'll see is a world where the most intelligent, smart business leaders will take the money that they're paying the intermediaries of Web2 and pay it directly to their community in Web3, and whether that be through play to earn type of models, whether that be through different NFTs and reward systems, whether that be through, through some type of governance token. There's a whole host of ways that may happen, but I think that is what's going to be the cataclysmic shift in how people think about growing and deploying their budgets, 3, 4, 5 years from now versus how they do it today.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at, things that are like airdrops or NFT giveaway as a type of customer acquisition cost, even liquidity mining for
Yes.
bootstrapping DeFi protocol. Do you see marketers from the Web2 era seeing that as like the customer acquisition cost and this user incentive being maybe one of the same or converging? Or do you think there's really like two different languages being spoken and no crossover between the Web3 incentive and the Web2 CAC?
I think, Chris, people are just starting to see it. I think it is on the very early side of it. And the reason for that, right, is because marketers tend to follow high adoption things. And if you look at wallet adoption is growing exponentially, but it's still on an absolute value small for most marketers, right? And so, do I think can this play to learn model work for my business? As well as like, well, what if only 0.5% of my prospects have a wallet? Then that gets a lot harder. When you're running a Web3 project, then by default you're serving that community already, and so the percentage of your prospective users who have wallets is 60, 70, 80, 90%. And so that's the thing that I think is driving this is wallet adoption. As wallet adoption continues to grow, you're going to see marketers come more and more into the Web3 world. I think I think there are some people like myself who are willing to speculate and invest early because of the importance that we think that type of technology and that type of community building incentives and infrastructure have for the long term of how businesses can be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting when people say crypto mass market adoption. It seems like it's like what we have right now in traders and NFT people and like early builders and dApp, and it's like more of it. The truth is that the group of people we currently have in traders and builders are like an insignificant percentage of the type of market to market it. Like it's not even a speck.
People use the NFT space because it's one of the broader spaces that people understand, right? Like people in the crypto community think of like punks and crypto kitties and stuff as like the origin projects. Everything that's on OpenSea right now is the origin projects, right? In the scale of all of that is like there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of projects that are going to drive nostalgia and be kind of these core projects that 5, 10, 20 years from now are going to be exponentially more valuable just because supply demand is coming in to vogue as they scale.
Yeah, and I think in the NFT space especially, nostalgia means that there is a little bit of cultural value and a little bit of like, kind of growth experience. Oh, we went through that together when this event happened, right?
Correct.
And I think the cultural attribution and the value of these shared experiences may seem like nothing. I was there at the first concert that Nirvana gave in Seattle. Well, that's now a lifetime of bragging. Hey, I was there when Bored Ape was minted is what people think, but the next project could be that moment for the next thing. So when we say we're still early, it's really not just like, oh, we're going to have more crypto trader coming in. Maybe they do, maybe finance, but it's really that the cultural meaning of actually marketing and living in actual commerce becomes, Web3 eyes in the tools. And I don't think people in the Web3 today, the old Web3, is prepared what that means.
No, they're not. And here's the reason for this. I think if, when I first started getting into Web3, I was like, oh, this is just a time problem. As more people learn about this technology, more people will adopt wallets. And then I realized it was a time plus lack of utility problem.
Time
right?
plus lack of utility. Yeah, that's great.
And if you look at any space, whether it be the DAO space, the NFT space, the DeFi space, the utility that is getting added to that technology is just compounding month over month, but it's still lower than the friction to like figure it out, to set the wallet up, to do all of the work. And once that value and that utility gets so high, that's when mass market adoption will happen. Right? You need
Hmm.
time for that education to happen, but you also need to have utility to be high enough so it's worth people getting out of their way of doing things and doing something new.
Yeah, and I think the thing about utility is that we can imagine what tokens can unlock utility wise, where we can say if trading and assets are liquid. I really believe that the Web3 utility is, as you said in the top of this conversation, is Web2 plus some new special source. So
Mm-hmm.
everything in Web2 could be a utility to Web3.
Yeah.
Customer relationship management, which is CRM in Web2,
Yeah.
could be a utility for Web3. Identify
Absolutely.
customer and segment based on their on-chain activity just seems like the best targeting in the world.
Yeah, well, exactly. And if you think about something as simple as like, I love what the folks that Shane and Matt and the XMTP folks are doing
Yes.
on their wallet-to-wallet messaging protocol. Like, there's just going to be new ways to interact, and instead of like you hitting spam on your inbox, you're just going to be able to be like, cool. Well, I need $20 in USDC to get your message. There's going to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
a way different way to set social norms, to set engagement. And we will take a lot of the best practices we learned in the last version of the Web 2, but then put them alongside
Hmm.
new things. Like I think of it this way, Chris. It's like Web 2 was making the Web 1 open protocols usable and open to the masses. Right?
Yes.
It was taking something that was already possible and making it 10 times better. Web3 is like, well, actually, it's the next gen of the iPhone versus an iPhone S. We are completely rebuilding all of the protocols. We are rebuilding the web, and we are making things that are
Yes.
currently impossible today possible in the future. And that is a step function change that I think most people don't yet realize is happening.
Yeah. And I think rebuilding the web protocol is something sometimes when I talk to engineers, so it's like, oh, I build React website or web app, or
Mm-hmm.
I do iOS and stuff like that. They think of Web3 as like this foreign technology that requires them to use Solidity instead of JavaScript, you doing wallets instead of login. My personal feeling, and this is our belief at Cardstack, is just that it's additive like everything
Yes.
else, right? So you're going to use JavaScript, you're going to use Python for machine learning and data analysis, you're going to use a traditional protocol for sign up and engagement and re-engagement and retargeting. But with that being said, wallets and airdrops and participation that is provable and membership that is not yankable, not on someone else's spreadsheet and guest list, something that's representing that type of programming model has to be more learnable. Right now, people think that they can't participate in Web3 as a developer or product designer unless they learn smart contract,
Yeah.
right? But I think that's always going to be a part of it because that's the delta, that's the new thing. But it's about bringing people who are building Web2 skill sets and say, here's a new version of a social network that taps into XMTP for the DM feature and then taps into the Lens protocol for the following feature.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's what it comes down to, being that amalgamation of the experience around these fundamental protocols.
Yeah, and I think people are looking for points of intersectionality here. And my principles around this are essentially, in Web 1, it was very backend focused. It was the core protocol backend layer. Web 2 is all about the front end. It was like, how do you make those backend protocols usable, democratized,
Yes.
great user experience? And Web 3 is back to the backend. And so how you're going to see the evolution is you're going to see a lot of the Web 3 backend work materialize in the Web 2 front ends. Right.
Yes.
And that's how the connection point is going to happen over the next couple of years, because that is going to make it familiar enough for somebody who's new to decentralized technology. It doesn't matter to the end user if the technology is centralized or decentralized. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
It matters what the value that they're getting out of it. And so kind of blending the best of both worlds, really great front end work, and now a
Yes.
modern, really different approach to back end computing and decentralized computing is going to be really powerful.
Do you think this whole Web2 front end being the gateway towards the Web3 protocol backend,
Yeah.
do you think that's the reason why the centralized player like Coinbase, which has a great front end and still probably have one of the better front end for introduction to crypto, do you think that type of Web2 businesses that like enables access to blockchain and Web3 are successful in this FTX? And whoever has a stadium or Super Bowl ad, right? Like that,
Yeah.
those are the people who are the current early winner of this crypto thing. Is it because that's all that matters and decentralization at the end don't matter just as long as you deliver front end on these new backend rails?
My controversial opinion is not all that matters, but it's a big part of
Mm,
what matters. You know,
yeah,
and I mean, look at it at the early end of Web 1 into Web 2. It's like you saw domain providers, like that's what mattered, right? GoDaddy
right,
won because
right,
they
right, right.
made editing your DNS way easier and everything, right? And the same thing is going to happen as we kind of bridge from Web 2 to Web 3, and I think the most successful Web 3 projects are going to be those that integrate really well with Web 2 front ends. And yes, you're seeing
Mhm.
was Coinbase's whole strategy, and I think was very successful. There's limitations to that strategy, and there's limitations to not being fully decentralized, as we know.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of people, that's okay. At the same time, do I think somebody's going to disrupt ADP and let people, be paid in whatever currency and stake that currency and auto manage taxes and all that stuff? 100%. And I think that's going to
Mhm.
things like that will be step function changes that will not be just iterative, kind of included in the Web 2 front end type of change.
Yeah, and I think this overlap between Web 2 Web 3, obviously tax reporting is important in Web 2,
Yeah.
and it's a real pain point in Web 3 today.
Huge.
Right? People are just tweeting about how they complain. It's like, Coinbase doesn't even tell you the cost basis.
Totally.
That could be a real problem. I mean, you really have to do your own accounting, and at the velocity and speed and the volatility, who really have the best records? You need machines to do that.
You have to. Look, one of the things I know about the web is every generation of the web becomes an order or orders of magnitude more complex.
Yes,
Like if you look
yes.
at, think about DeFi. How much more complex is DeFi than the current, like, financial investment infrastructure, which is hugely complex?
Yes,
But
yes,
DeFi
yes.
is an order of magnitude more complex than the current infrastructure. And that's not a bad thing. It's just true.
Yeah, and I mean, we use the word full stack in Web 2 to describe front end, back end services, monitoring data. Well, what is the stack with Web 3?
Yeah.
Wallet, account, risk management, seed management, security, OPSEC is the fullest stack. It's so full, it's overflowing, right? And I
Correct.
think that intimidation right now is that the stack of Web 3 plus Web 2 is bigger than most one person can keep in their head. So you
Yeah.
either just focus on like, hey, this is my contract, I'm just deploying it and call it a day, which I think has some good success there. But that's also not reaching out to that end user that is the front end. So I think there's going to be this redefinition of what a full stack is, or better yet, a simplification from a product development point of view of what does it mean to make a thing that has a front end, a wallet capability, and a back end, and an integration to an existing Web 2. That has to be as easy as making a new website or web app using Ruby on Rails or React. It isn't today.
No, it's not at all today, and I think that's what we're seeing is anytime you're in a new phase of transformative growth, you just have all the categories that are out there, and some of those categories are going to die, and some of those categories are going to be $1 trillion business
Right.
categories, right? And
Yes.
you
Yeah.
just don't know because the emphasis is so low. So that complexity will whittle down and be better longer term, but it will still be way more complex than the Web 2 frameworks and mental models that we use to think about how the internet runs and operates today.
Absolutely. A lot of our work at Cardstack, the reason we call ourselves Stack is that, we have to look at this as a software stack
Yes.
that incorporates Web 2 and Web 3. And a lot of our technology is about how do we use this idea of these standard, right? NFT is cool, right? You have a ELC 721 standard. And around that, you've got metadata, you've got transfer ownership right within one standard. So can we create standard for what a tax report will look like? Can we create a standard what a new contracts for agreement between two parties look like? And can we use that kind of object or that
Yeah.
kind of entity, which we call cards, as a way to make it easier to reason about? So it's more like assembling blocks of stuff or like an object in a game versus the pieces of the polygons and the text and stuff like that. So that's a lot of our composability is how do we take the composability of the smart contract, which has been kind of invented by Vitalik and popularized by the Ethereum people. Can we extend that to UI inclusive experiences? But it is certainly a big a challenge technically, and then once we have that challenge, the question is how do you educate people who know how to do web development to participate in this new stack?
Yeah, but the composability was what really attracted me to what you guys were doing, Chris, at Cardstack. Because I was like, as I kept thinking about this, it's like that's the only way to make this complexity manageable long term.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy problem that you all are solving. It's incredibly complex, and the more I've talked to you, the more I've learned about it. But I've got to think that, agnostic of even what you guys are doing at Cardstack, like that's going to be a big part, a core trend in Web3 we're going to see over time is how do we make things more and more composable.
Yeah, and then composability has to be extend to developers and also extend to regular people. Like if you
Yes.
were to start a DAO, which is the hot topic of the day, the tool's kind of uneven.
Yes, very.
Non-existent, depends on how you look at it, right?
Yes.
Lots of promises and conference panel, but very few usable tools. What's your thoughts about DAOs, assuming they have the tools to run? How does that overlap with this idea of like a kind of knowledge community or community of practice that you've seen in Web2, in the product marketing space? And do you see that they are the same, or is it because of the diversity of talent in the DAO not the same thing?
Well, I see them as I see DAOs as the next evolution of how especially businesses have thought about community. One of the things I like about a DAO is a DAO could essentially be a business or it can be a community subset of a business, which is really great.
Yes.
What I love about it is their DAOs are automation first organizations. And in any time an organization is automation first, you can start to get scale and you can start to make really interesting things happen in a way that's actually really hard to do in the Web2 version of community. Then the other thing I love is incentives and incentive management. Like the fact that you can do bounties, the fact that you can have a treasury and deploy that treasury for the health of a community in the way you just can't right now if the community is run by a central entity. That central entity is either has a different business priority or community is the business model and they're running it for a margin, And what I love is that we're going to empower organizations and communities to make their own decisions and set up the right incentives to do that. I think the tooling for that is really hard right now. I think there's a long way before that actually happens, but I love the ability to automate and especially automate incentives, and the rules around incentives is really, really powerful.
And then I think what's really interesting about the DAO incentive system is that it can be so multidimensional, right?
Yes.
Right now, when we talk about incentives in crypto and DeFi in particular, you only have one way of getting incentives, which is lending your capital. If you lend your capital, you contribute to secure liquidity rewards or yield farming. That's the only incentive, and it encourages a type of behavior. I wouldn't call it entirely mercenary because mercenary means that you're violating the rule, but that is the rule. The rule is just provide capital in exchange. But when we go beyond capital markets, the money is not the product. It's not the real ingredient of success anymore. Once you go outside DeFi,
so hold on. Before you move on, I want to. You bring up a really important point that I want everybody to understand.
Yeah.
Right now, community in Web3 is a little bit more mercenary and a little bit more monetary focus, right?
Yes.
The community in Web2 is at the complete opposite end of the spectrum. It is exceptionally altruistic. It's free T-shirt based community, right? And we need to get into a model that's the right blend of the two of those,
right?
Where it is not this mercenary, capital driven incentives that drive the wrong engagement, the wrong behavior to scale a community, but the incentives are meaningful enough that people actually take action, unlike a lot of the current incentives in Web2.
So do you think that the Web2 incentives, the free T-shirt model, like we've given this T-shirt away and people really like it, it's great.
T-shirt,
it's a limited run of less than 1,000. So whoever has it has a slowly deteriorating vintage T-shirt NFT, which is more valuable than a not deteriorating vintage T-shirt NFT, as we know. Do you see the DAO communities adopt this idea that, how do I say this? That it's work, that because there is this monetary incentive that they're going to work when they log in a Discord? Or do you think it should be more like, I'm going to hang out with my friends, which is closer to the Web2 model? Is the financial incentive going to materially change what you can achieve if compensation was too much part of maybe not big money compensation, but it's in a little bit money, like, pay for certain things. Do you think that gets in the way, or does that help?
I think it helps is my direct answer to your question. The way I think about it right now is when you have solely altruistic incentives, and I would say altruistic not being indirect, non-straight cash
Yeah.
incentives,
Mm-hmm.
you think about what's in it for yourself. And so most business community folks, for example, pick an industry, are doing altruistic community contributions for their career. They're
Mm-hmm.
basically doing something that they think is going to trade. They're going to be able to trade into a better job or a new job that's going to allow them to make more money, right? Which is
Yes.
cool and awesome.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's kind of this indirect bet.
Right.
What I think is going to happen in the future is that you're going to be part of a DAO. You're going to get paid, and you might maybe
Mm.
enough to be part of your full-time job. But instead of like doing all this stuff for free and paying for this education over here in Web 2, you're going to get paid to learn.
Yes.
You're going to get paid to contribute. And then you can still trade all of that knowledge and education in for a better vocation or better spot in your career. So it's very transformative to the lifestyle of the average person in a way that I think is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we have to shine a light on something that nobody wants to really talk about. A lot of the open, especially open source or community work is for positioning yourself to raise your profile within the community to get a job from not just exclusively the FAANG companies, but let's say the FAANG companies, right?
Sure.
Or like a unicorn like that is growing or about to go public, or a public company. So to me, the monetization come from traditional employment. And I think being able to participate in multiple community of which you're an expert, or focus on one when you have passion, that type of choices don't really exist. You can't go and take 3 jobs, right? Doing one task unless you're going independent as a consultant.
This is one of my theses of why NFTs are so popular, Chris. Is because it is direct monetary benefit for participating in a community.
Mm-hmm.
Like you believe in this project, you market this project, you have an you have an ownership stake in this project, so you keep marketing it, you keep promoting it, and then subsequently, for all of that work you have done for the community, your holdings increase in value, right? And that is what's happened with somebody's career in Web 2. What instead is going to happen in way beyond their career in Web 3, whether it be through NFTs, whether it be through a DAO participation, a whole host of other things. They're going to be able to earn a more material amount of money from their community participation.
Yeah. And I think people always are surprised how little it takes in income substitution to feel like you can do the thing you always wanted to do versus being, it's not a lot. And,
no, it's not that, hundreds of percent.
Right.
It's like 30.
Yes. And that 30 could grow to 50, 80, and 100 with in quick things. And I think the people who are, most like changed by Web3 are the people who felt like, now that I couldn't do anything, what would I do? What is really interesting that sometimes people would choose the altruistic participation as the thing they do, right? That still feels better. So I don't think we'll lose that. But
no, I don't think we're going to lose it either. I think we're just going to have a better balance.
Yes. Yeah. This style thing is fascinating to me. To me, one of the dangers in Web2 versus Web3 type of like kind of meme discussions about Web2 is like a corporation, Web3 is like a cooperative, Web2 is read-write, and Web3 is read-write-own, is that it drives us towards these kind of skeuomorphic analogies. We must have the Web3 version of financial service looks like a Web2 except one thing. I think the new forms, when you like take the natural form that is enabled by the technology and design something exclusively correct for that form. For example, the most successful video online thing is not a feature film. Oscars, right? No. Like, it's strangely irrelevant. As funny as it is yesterday to see the shenanigans at the end of the night, the movie industry doesn't seem culturally relevant anymore.
No.
In a way that some YouTube event or like a YouTube giveaway from Mr. Beast seem more relevant today.
Way more relevant.
And that's the thing, like the people who really succeeded with YouTube, a Web2 version of media and video, invented this 9 to 20-minute video form. And now the TikTok people
Yeah.
are inventing this looping thing, and it's changing the thing. What do you think in the Web3 fields today feels skeuomorphic to you, and you believe that there's a natural form that will take over in the observation of it? Because I feel like the discovery of this new form could be the trigger necessary for Web3 to not look like an inferior version of Web2, slower, more expensive. Like, what are you seeing in terms of that skeuomorphic?
That's a really, really good question. Not one that I've spent a ton of time thinking about. What I would tell you is, I think we're in this like maximalist run of society. Like, I think you kind of have Web 2 maximalists who are like, why would you ever run a decentralized computing system? They're inefficient. They're bad for the environment. List all the reasons, right? Then you have your Web 3 people who are just maximalists for decentralized, which everything should be decentralized. There's, centralization's evil, and it's just bad for the world. I think the skeuomorphic thing is that there's going to be much more of a blend of those two, as we've talked about, than we think, and that there are a bunch of things that don't need to be fully decentralized, but they need to be partially decentralized to
Mm-hmm,
be
mm-hmm.
the best version of what they can be, right? And then I think I keep coming back to like messaging, and like whether it be wall-to-wall messaging or messaging infrastructure in Web3, because that to me does feel like something that's broken in Web2.
Yeah,
Messaging is really broken. Email, spam, all of these things are really broken. And I see that as something where we will take a 10x improvement and change that over the course of Web3 versus maybe some other problems that are going to be more incremental over time.
Yeah, I have a heuristic that to know what is broken in Web2, just look at what the European Commission complains about.
Yes.
Privacy, now it's like interoperability of messaging. Now, their solution and recommendation of fixing causes more problem, like the GDPR banner.
Yes.
So I trust the European Commission for their identification of problems. I really do not have appreciated the thoughtfulness of their solution to those problems. But the heuristic is that the European are pretty prescient about seeing Web2 and tech, big tech for what they are. But I think to me, when I look at the skeuomorphism of the current Web3 product, the one that seemed the most skeuomorphic to me in the wrong way, as in it is replicating some Web2 fintech version, is the wallet. I think when we talk about what wallet can be, we talk about like your personal passport, your ability. But if you look at every wallet, even the latest one from whoever is going to wallet, they all look like a version of Venmo or like Charles Schwab or E-Trade and stuff like that. So I feel like we haven't really embraced the wallet as a new form. I think we're still looking at wallet as some sort of asset tracker. Right? This personal passport thing is rare because your identity is split among many of your apps, especially in the Western world. Maybe in China, WeChat is more of your identity.
Well, that's the point I was going to make. The future wallet in Web3 is going to look way more like WeChat than it does Charles Schwab. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to be a stack of applications. It's going to be a super app consortium of things versus just kind of a basic financial infrastructure.
Yeah, so I welcome a lot more innovation from different chains and different people, kind of ticking messaging and this kind of verifiable identity type thing as a new substrate to do it. Now, obviously, at Cardstack, we have we're experimenting with wallet design around using smart contract wallet as a fundamental, which is just like having account with multiple users with multiple rights. It's just a bigger design space than my wallet has 12 words in it. I better not lose it to show it to people.
Yes.
So we're working on that. But I think the metaphors of wallet as passport, wallet as identity, wallet as membership, wallet as history, wallet as like keepsake, wallet as gallery to show up. These are all things that I don't think we have fully embraced in this current iteration of wallet design. Not just pick a MetaMask, it is the tool for everything else. MetaMask is the command line era wallet. Just to be able to do it is great, but it's certainly not the metaphor. The metaphor is really missing. We talk about it on Twitter, but we don't build it in Figma yet.
No, we will build it. It's it's one of those things where, look, we're so early. We're
Yeah,
so early. We're at the command line arrow phase of all of
pretty
this,
much.
right? So
Yes,
I kind of
yes.
think we're at where we should be. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we're not going to make way more progress, and I think we're going to make progress faster than we all think, which will be great. But it
Yes.
doesn't mean that there's just not gaping opportunities out there for a smart team to come along and tackle.
And there's many smart teams, and, and
Yes.
and I think this whole, the browser war of the Web 1 era, we're going to become the wallet war of the Web 3 era. I
Yes.
think it's about to happen, especially if you attribute wallet as that discovery platform and that kind of showing off and that social viral thing. That is the most important real estate, right? It's going to replace the news feed in
Yes.
Web 2, or the kind of dashboard in the SaaS, or even the search page as the primary discovery of what I can do. So you can, look at your wallet and say, hey, given everything you own, this is something you should look into. Well, how valuable is that suggestion and that real estate at that tab? Well, if we calculate in the kind of direct response that click is worth $150, that's how much real estate is that worth,
Yeah.
with a push notification even more so, right? So I think the design space, hopefully not exploited too early to become some spammy kind of like,
Yes.
grimy places, but if done correctly around the user's interest in mind, the community interest in mind, what an amazing design space to invest time in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So you mentioned to me when we were discussing about go-to-market strategy for Web3 companies. So far, there's a couple. One is build a giant Discord channel and just like collect people,
Yeah.
right? Like people collect NFT collects people, right?
Yeah,
On the
of
Discord
course.
channel is kind of an interesting dichotomy, the kind of like symbiosis there. And to me, the go-to-market strategy of Web2 has almost nothing to do with building a large Discord community or doing a lot of layer drops and stuff like that. There's this whole world out there that people can find new customer, identify new segments. What do you think Web3 project like ours or company like ours can learn from like Web2 kind of go-to-market technique? Are there things that are applicable that is being underexplored? Are there things that are
Yeah.
no longer applicable because of the nature of Web3?
Yeah, when you think about go to market, the real innovation in Web 2 was getting great at programmatic marketing. And
Mm,
programmatic marketing is things like search engine optimization,
mm,
link building, referral traffic, all of those things that keep bringing people back to you, either to you for the first time or back to you on a very regular programmatic basis, right? If you think about most of the marketing that's happening in Web3, it's very campaign based. It's like, oh,
mm,
I'm doing this drop and that's going to bring people into my Discord. That's cool. That's awesome.
mhm,
But that's
mhm.
also kind of like what it was like in the 1950s and 60s when soap operas started and
Right.
like Tide was funding like kind of one-off campaigns for some of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, you have to have a go to market model no matter what type of business you're building that is a good blend of that campaign kind of point in time based marketing as well as really effective efficient programmatic marketing that comes through education content, highly engaged DAO with the right incentives where people are constantly coming back and engaging. Like
Mhm,
engagement is going to be even more scarce in Web3 than it was in Web2. And so you need to
mm.
have not just the right incentives, but the right programmatic experiences to keep bringing people back to you.
Yeah, and it seems like the leader of the Web3 world, like the Coinbases and the FTXs, are still doing brand marketing stunts on Super Bowl, which seems like a pretty old way
Well,
of
yeah,
doing things.
and
And I think
I
that
don't hate it. I don't hate on them for doing that. And I think Coinbase and other folks are still doing SEO and some of the other
right.
stuff. But is the balance of those two things
Mhm,
right?
mhm. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what I
and
don't know.
and obviously we're still in the awareness of what Web3 can do. I'm curious of your thoughts. What do you think of the term Web3? I mean, this is the third iteration of the term. We used to call it crypto, and then it was blockchain, and now it's kind of Web3. Is it the right word to rally around, or is it too late to change?
I think it's too late to change. I do. I do. I think it's too late to change.
Yeah.
And I think one, it's the best marketing is different but familiar,
Mm, mhm.
and we kind of talked about Web 2 was a thing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Web 2 was a clear branding. And so we're just setting a generational marker. And the reason I'm okay with Web 3 is because as we talked about earlier, the complexity of this generation of technology and the internet is just so much more vast than the
Yes.
previous generation, that you need the right roll-up term so that somebody who is
Yes.
not a student of it can kind of have a little bit mental model of how it works. And I
Yeah. It
think
needs to.
a term like Web3 gives somebody like, oh, this is a new generation. There are new things happening. Oh, those new things are basically decentralized so that they can enable new use cases. Great. I
Right.
can keep that little bit of it in my head.
Yes. It's a large enough lasso, yet familiar but different, right? So
Yes.
it's that combination of the thing. What do you think of the word metaverse?
I hate Metaverse. I hate it so bad. I hate it so bad. It's like it's terrible branding.
Yes, and I think it's made a little bit more terrible by the association with Oculus and Zuckerberg touting his thing. So
Yeah.
it seems like there is two camps, right? One is the metaverse camp, and that is co-optable or co-opted, depends on how you look at Meta and this branding and how powerful it is, just as a meme, as a word. And then Web3 hasn't really been embraced by the power that be,
Yeah.
and it may be in that absence of centralized, I don't think Coinbase tell themselves they're a Web3 company, right?
Mhm.
I still think that is a little bit outside. Crypto is a better phrase for the
Yeah.
work in the center of what they do. I think the community can kind of, I like the fact that Web3 is usually spelled with the W as lowercase. It's like not a proper noun.
Yeah.
It's like Bitcoin is supposed to be lowercase b. People forgot that,
Yep.
right? And that was the whole vision, that it is not a thing. It's just, that's own. It's not a proper noun. It's a common noun, right?
Yes.
Lowercase Bitcoin, lowercase Web3. I do like the fact that like the aspiration version of Web2 was called Web 2.0, right?
Yes.
That was the
Yes.
actual spelling of Web2. And now Web2 has a little bit, it's like, you work for a Web2 company.
Of course.
But
Just the
to
life
me, it's
cycle.
like, yeah, but the thing about it is that Web2 is like 99.9% of all value in tech.
Yes.
Right, or enabled by tech, and I think Web3
Will
people
be for
really
a long
need to
time, by the way.
yes, and it's not changing at the time. So I know you've said many times that not only are we still early to Web3, you're still early to SaaS.
Yeah, absolutely. The SaaS market is just getting started. We've got a good 50 years of SaaS growth.
Yes, and this kind of self custody is hard enough. Self hosting is literally impossible. So I think a lot of the protocols is really about synthesis and orchestration with the root of control in the user without them losing that. So I think the combination of being able to, we call it do it yourself or do it for me.
Yep.
In crypto, it is possible, and we should keep that ideal and that possibility open to do it all yourself.
Yes.
Practically, it's a new balance between do it yourself and do it for me. And finding that balance in the technology, in the learning and the teaching and the leveling up with different people of different skill sets and capability and ambition is going to be a big part of segmentation of, for those really paranoid people who want their own seed phrase in 10 different bird location with a treasure map 10 two pieces. Okay, you go ahead and make a treasure map, right, of 100 Bitcoin that you're hiding. But for most people is a new deal, right, about personal sovereignty and all this stuff like that, but still familiar within an iOS app that with the Face ID magic happens.
I think that was exceptionally well said. I think that is what the society is thinking about all of this new emerging technology.
Yeah. So what are you thinking about now, observing, the adoption curve and seeing we're early in this, late in that, or still early in that. But is there something you're seeing that you're like reflecting on, say, hey, I think there's a thing that I recognize that other people hasn't recognized yet. Like, is there something that is like sticking in the back of your mind that may be a bit contrarian, maybe way too early, and maybe a bit crazy that you want to share?
Well, I mean, I think there are a few things. Some things you and I've talked about is just the B2B applications of all these things are crazy, right? Like the back office implications of smart contracts, the implications of staking for product discounts and rebates and everything is crazy. I think there's huge opportunity there in a way that I don't think people are really talking about it. I think I spend most of my time though thinking about like what utility could exist in the current technology, like NFTs could have 100x more utility than they have today, for example,
Oh,
right?
for
And
sure.
as we all know that, and so I think it's talking about what types of utility are going to be the most valuable. And it's like, I live in the B2B world. It's like, if you're running a business event, like having NFTs as your tickets, just like 10 times more utility. You solve supply demand, you solve the secondary market, all of these things, right?
Yes.
But to close out, the thing I think that's probably much crazier is that we're living in a secondary market society, right?
Yeah.
And the primary market is every good in this world is basically has an IPO now, and it's just like the
Yes.
primary market sets a very initial price, and then the secondary market decides if the price goes up or down from there. And so much of what I think about emerging technology is how it intersects with the secondary market for whatever it's serving, and
hmm
what utility needs to change for it to really own that secondary market.
I think that's really well said. I think we look at second market as like flipping or like speculation,
Yes.
but what it really is the best goods are handed down and sold. It's like take care of this. A lot of secondary goods are the most valuable goods. Fabergé egg is a
Yeah,
secondary market.
of
It is
course.
the most valuable thing in the world. Now, obviously, a random bucket from the 1800 may not be worth much unless it's an antique, right?
Yeah.
So there are something that you want, like, hey, you want cheese. I want like new cheese, not old
It's
cheese.
true. Fair.
But some people like really old cheese, so old
Yeah, of
wine, stuff like
course.
that. But I think secondary market is just much more a human concept, right? Because as a buyer and a seller, there's two humans. In the primary market, it always seems like it's a corporation you're dealing with. So I feel like the secondary market is just allowing us to re-explore how human to human commerce can happen, how community can deduce to between two people, between three people, between a bunch of people own their own thing, rethinking our society from these more human building block versus the industrial supply chain. I think is a
This is
positive reopening of some of the history that we've learned,
Yeah, look, I think
in the
you're
world.
seeing this. You're a Swiss foundation. The Switch watch industry is doing this right now, right?
hmm
They got completely out of whack in supply and demand. The secondary market for Swiss watches, on the most part, is very high. And so, what do they
Yes.
do? What are they doing now? They're cutting out all of the wholesalers, all the
Yes.
jewelry
Yes.
stores, all those people. They're basically saying like, nope, we're going to go direct to consumer because the only thing we have left is margin control, right?
Yes.
And so when you live in a world where the secondary market is becoming the primary market,
hmm
what is happening is that the intermediary, the distributors, all the middlemen, and are just getting completely cut out. And so if you're looking at
hmm
Web3 for a boring opportunity that's going to make a bunch of money, it is cutting out the middleman of Web2, right?
Which I
Because
think is, yeah, this intermediation and
yes,
or
disintermediation
re-intermediate.
is the core thread among all of this, and something I'm obsessed with, and think that we've barely touched the surface of disintermediation at this point.
Yeah, I think that's much more to come in terms of new models and the primitive and technology, the composability we talked about earlier, give rise to new forms, right? So
Yes.
it's not baked into, oh, that's how Fed Y works, and therefore money transfer in the US or in the world by extension the US can only happen one way. So it's really exciting to see the infrastructure start settling in paces and have new group of imaginative product builders looking at these pieces of technology that's being built out in infrastructure and say, what kind of community houses and towns we can build,
Mhm.
and there's new material, new infrastructure, new clay, new type of construction techniques, and it's really exciting to see this happen in real time.
I completely agree.
Well, Kip, this is fun.
Thanks, Chris.
I
This is
think
a
we
really
covered a
fun
lot.
time.
We cover a lot of things, and thank you for the community for joining us today. And if you have any questions, just send it to us, and we can we maybe forward and maybe put a write up together and summarize this thing in a blog post form. But as always, it's really enlightening to see your perspective in this intersection or this kind of liminal space between Web2 and Web3. But I feel like this little tunnel that connects those two worlds is going to become the broadest
Oh yeah.
thoroughfare in probably a couple of years, maybe even months.
Yes, I agree. It's gonna all happen quickly. Thanks for having me, Chris. Thanks to everybody in the community for tuning in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and all have a good day. Thanks.